This session is Insights to Action, how Newton Baby uses incrementality experiments to maximize their ROI. Newton Baby will share their success with incrementality testing and prioritizing experimentation to optimize marketing and ad spend. They will share several experiments. I love case studies, right? From test ideation to actual business impact, and how they uncovered the halo effect of TikTok and Meta campaigns on Amazon sales. Super interesting. And why it's essential to retest advertising channels during promotional periods. Our speakers are Zagha, CMO of Newton Baby, and Zach Epstein, CEO and founder of Haus. And a fun fact is that these two actually met here at Commerce Next last year during one of the one-on-one sessions. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So can give a quick background on myself and background on Haus, do a little introduction for yourself, and then we can dig into some of the experiments you guys have run.
Sounds great.
So I'm Zach. I'm the founder and CEO of Haus. We are a causal inference analytics company where we help companies run world-class experimentation to figure out the effectiveness of marketing without relying on third-party cookies, IDFAs, or conversion signals. Before this, I was at Google for 7 years, leading data science and analytics teams, helping some of the biggest brands in the world solve these challenges, before moving into product management, where I was leading the team focused on privacy-safe ad targeting of what does the future of ad targeting look like in a world with existential privacy deprecation, which fundamentally impacts the world of measurement and the need to be able to run experimentation without necessarily relying on some of those user fingerprints and other identifiers that you wouldn't have access to.
Hi, I'm Zagha, the CMO of Newton Baby. Newton was launched almost 10 years ago now to commercialize a really innovative new crib mattress. The inside of the mattress kind of looks like ramen noodles before you put them in water. We call it woven air. It's really an incredible product. Babies can breathe straight through it, so there's no suffocation risk. And you can also wash the inside of the mattress, which is really important because babies are gross. Over the past few years, we've launched all kinds of ancillary products, including other baby products like bassinets, pack and plays, now kids mattresses, and even dog and pet bed mattresses.
Yeah, I have a 17-month-old who uses a Newton Baby mattress, and seeing your baby face down on the mattress is the most terrifying thing in the world. So do understand the value and love the product. So Aaron, we met a year ago, and initially we started talking about incrementality testing. I'm just curious, what was it from that meeting where you're like, oh, this is something that I should potentially invest in or want to learn a lot more about?
Yeah, I've always been a bit of a data nerd. I have a finance background. So I always wanted to test everything humanly possible, and I thought we were fairly sophisticated by the point that we met. When I started at Newton, we were all GA, and then we kind of moved relatively quickly. I did some regression analysis for a very rudimentary media mix model. We eventually hired an MTA, and I thought that we were doing a pretty good job capturing our incrementality through the MTA. Then you at our one-on-one said, oh, have you tested brand search? I was like, what do you mean? It's our highest ROAS campaign in the MTA. And you're like, you should test brand search. And I was like, that's heresy. I can't have a competitor at the top of our search results. And so we effectively made a bet. And I was like, sure, I'll try you, because if that is true in and of itself, it'll more than pay for our entire year's worth of Haus membership. And so we did. And here it is. Here's the results. Yeah.
What did you guys find?
Not incremental. So it was of course pretty shocking. Zach was of course mostly correct. But yeah, as you can see from kind of the chart here, there were times when it looked a little incremental, times not, but overall very limited incrementality. We did tease out some slight effects later on in subsequent tests and we found that it was slightly incremental during promotions only. So we still do run a teeny bit, but I think our spend is down 95% versus what we've been spending beforehand.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where I think when you look in GA or you look at some click-based attribution, brand search looks like the best thing ever. And really, as a company where we work with almost 100 brands, from everybody from mega corporations like Intuit down to smaller retailers, You do see this spectrum of, for some companies, brand search works really well. It is never particularly incremental from a percentage standpoint, and it shouldn't be. It's inexpensive, and the cost relative to the lift is the thing that can net out. But in aggregate across our customers, we've probably seen about $1 billion moving out of brand search. And I think it's a reflection of sometimes it works for those companies, that's amazing. Sometimes it doesn't work, and advocating really to test for yourself, because it's a very large sum of money, and it's one that often brands don't really think too much about.
That was our single biggest line item at the campaign level by far.
Yeah, and so as you've thought about testing with Haus, and we're going to go through a couple other of the case studies that you guys have done, but I'm just curious, as you've thought more broadly about the types of experiments you've run with Haus, what have been the way you've thought about putting together that roadmap, kind of figuring out, because as we go through some of these really interesting cases around shifting budgets or halo effects from retailers, I'm curious, from the CMO level, how are you thinking about what test and learn means and experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one, and the one that we started with, was let's just test in order of spend. Clearly, if there's any detectable effect in any of our biggest line items, we're going to see the biggest benefits. But as we started getting going and started learning the platform and talking through with Haus's amazing AMs, we kind of got ideas for other things that would never have occurred to us, like relative spend levels or new channels or things like that. So we, while at first it was just straight descending order, we did veer off occasionally when it made sense to do so.
Yeah, I think descending order makes sense. Also, when the ad platforms say, here's this new thing you should try, or it's a new form of bidding, or you're not sure. Often channel diversification is a pretty common one of, we're interested in diversifying our channel mix and moving into new places. Does that work? And making sure you have the confidence, the amount of spend to do that in a way where you're not just throwing darts to see if it might actually happen for you.
Especially for new channels we're considering, we always say, can this be Haus tested? If so, how? Let's make sure our pilot, is something that we can test with Haus.
Yeah. So tell us about your Meta experiment on Amazon Halo.
Yeah. So forever we've long known that an ad, even if it just drives, we're basically Shopify and Amazon. So if an ad just drives to our site, clearly there's going to be some halo effect on Amazon. We had no way to quantify that. There's no way to really understand it unless you, unless you basically drive ads to Amazon, and we didn't want to do that. So that was really the second reason we hired you guys, is because you guys can measure basically halo effects across both platforms. So Meta was our second biggest line item spend. So we're let's test it, and especially we want to make sure and capture any effects on Amazon to get the true company-wide ROIs.
Yeah, I think this has been one that's been really eye-opening for a lot of companies. Is sometimes you'll run an experiment and intuitively you think oh, our ads are probably impacting what's going on in Amazon. But I think sometimes people can significantly downplay the order of magnitude or the scale, and especially as a baby brand with registries and some of our other customers who find really significant uplift on Amazon. It might be lower AOV products, so they get free shipping with Prime, and there's a variety of reasons why folks end up gravitating there. But it's a really significant impact, because when you run these experiments at scale, often you're driving a lot more effectiveness with the media investments than you have visibility into.
And I think the results you can see on the screen were demonstrate, and much to our surprise, I would have expected it to be flipped. But it turns out they're more incremental on Amazon, which certainly undermined the way that we historically had always reported, which was we have a Shopify ROAS and we have an Amazon ROAS, and that's the only way that we really could report historically. But it turns out our Amazon ROAS is 3-4x our Shopify for Meta.
Yeah, and so the last thing I'll say, we obviously do this with Amazon. We can do it with Costco or Target or Walmart or any of these other retailers. Often we'll find for brands that it's not just about understanding the effectiveness, but across different channels you'll have different contribution margins. Mm-hmm. And where maybe the incrementality is relatively low, changing that purchase journey can make a pretty significant impact on the bottom line. And we've seen some of our customers reallocate in that way. So not necessarily to large incremental results, but more towards profitability, which has been great for them. So tell us about TikTok.
Yeah, so after running the Meta thing, our next biggest spend channel was TikTok. We'd seen what I would call good results. Certainly relative to other CMOs that I talk to often, we were pretty happy with our TikTok performance. And the question was, wow, if Meta's 3 times more incremental to Amazon, is TikTok also? All of the links, everything goes back to our Shopify site. But what is the impact to Amazon? And so what we found was that it was more incremental, but not nearly to the same degree. Clearly, you could see the 4.1 versus the 5.1. It was very incremental to our site also, but still also driving more to Amazon.
Yeah, I think TikTok and these view-based conversion channels are really when you have a view-based conversion event, whether it's on YouTube or it's on TikTok, the ability to stitch together the user graph of this individual saw this impression, they made this purchase, then your reliance on a conversion API passing the data back, there's a lot that can get lost in the shuffle there. Yeah. And I think being able to have this kind of both omni-channel look, but particularly from a view-based lens, so I don't know if anybody here has had these types of issues, but we've seen up to 400% and 500% deviations from like a platform reported CPA. So it's actually being driven, particularly in these view-based conversion channels, just because there's a huge halo that could be taking place either to your site or even to these other sites just due to tracking loss, which has dramatically changed the way a lot of our customers approach their business.
Yeah, I mean, like literally at this point, we almost have no idea what the ROI is going to turn out to be because there's been such big discrepancies versus, even versus MTA also. So it's always almost always shocking and surprising.
Yeah, and I guess that might be a kind of like a good question is how do you think about experiments with MTA? Because obviously experiments are part of the suite, MTA is part of the suite, platform reporting. Just how do you think about that resolution broadly?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we really rely on MTA for optimizing within a channel and for more real-time adjustments and things like that. We don't look at it cross-channel at all anymore, 0.
Yeah.
So we don't use it for budgeting at all anymore.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's within a channel and generally speaking. But even within the channel, sometimes the attribution issues if if you call YouTube under Google, which probably not, but there can be pretty significant deviations across.
For sure.
So
yeah.
So now talk about shifting spend from TikTok and Meta.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of those cases where we kind of veered off. We were like, oh wow, TikTok is more incremental altogether than Meta. So let's shift budget. Can we scale up TikTok significantly more? Also, this was when everyone was whining about the algorithm changes and Meta blowing up and all of the crises that I think a lot of people went through in February, March of last year. And so we ran an experiment and flipped our relative spends, so more on TikTok than Meta. And it turned out that no, we couldn't really scale TikTok all that much more. And our relative spend levels that we had been operating at were superior from an incrementality perspective.
Yeah, I think this is a really great test because ultimately, often when companies are trying to manage their channels, they think about them in a relatively siloed way. Whereas I think we would always advocate for viewing your marketing investments with an opportunity cost, and the opportunity cost is the other places that you could spend that money. And ultimately, you're trying to figure out not only where you should be investing, but then the levels you should be investing in, and making that kind of clear demarcation between what might be happening with TikTok and what might be happening with Meta is a really significant difference. It's also just amazing to see it relative to a whole that how much both of these channels are driving for you, which is huge.
Yeah, no, it was big, and there's also sometimes non-financial, non-data-driven decisions to be made. Everyone realized that they had to shift spend away from Meta or risk blow-ups in the algorithm. Or now people think they have to shift away from TikTok because of bans, et cetera. And so these things can certainly help quantify the opportunity cost.
Yeah, I do think about this a lot. In a world of data-driven decision-making, I think, and I know that's the purpose of this track, there's really the fundamental question of how do you get the right data? And I think how do you measure it correctly, and then running these experiments to be able to validate it. Because when we look at I remember when we were going through this, I was like, wow, look at these great tests, because you're seeing these very action-oriented decisions where there's a really clear decision outcome of great, we run this experiment, you get an understanding of marketing effectiveness, fantastic, but it's built in a decision framework where you're able to say, Meta did better than TikTok, therefore the investment goes here, and we're driving incremental lift to the business.
And I would jump into this point and say, I don't think this one was our idea. I think once we saw the incrementality of TikTok, I think Alyssa or Olivia, one of our Haus reps was like, ooh, you guys should test scaling. And this is one of my favorite things about working with agencies and basically anyone who works with a number of brands is we get really good ideas and suggestions. And it's true both for like a meta agency that can draw on the collective wisdom of all the other brands they mentioned that they manage and other tests they've run. And our AMs have been super helpful in suggesting things to test. I mean, I never would have tested brand if I didn't have an outside agency like effectively guiding a roadmap and suggesting a roadmap, which has been super helpful.
Yeah, like the CS team at Haus is really amazing. Of just former growth marketers, folks with backgrounds in experimentation, just because it is one of the things, and I'm actually curious for your take of like, moving deep into the world of experimentation, did you need to readjust sort of the way you view any of this? Because I would argue we can make the tooling available, but a lot of what this actually presents is like a cultural shift of a different way of thinking about how you go about business, where you need to like a lot of folks will like, hey, we just did this thing for 2 days, that was an experiment. Whereas like this might mean you need to run for a couple of weeks, there might be spend thresholds, there's like confidence levels that you need to get to. Were there any significant changes as you thought through that?
It's imposed a lot of, all kinds of discipline, and really making sure that the entire team and like our outside agencies understand statistical significance, confidence intervals, which I've always harped on with my team, but we have outside agencies buying Google ads, for example, and maybe they don't all know and understand statistical significance. So things like that, and it has imposed constraints. So we'll want to launch a product and we think it'll work really well on TikTok, but we're running a house test and we don't want to really pollute all the data, so we have to wait an additional 2 weeks for a post-test observation window or something. So it does certainly come with constraints.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll say to this is like, just for me getting on my data high horse for a second, of like, I love talking about confidence intervals because I think they're one of the least understood concepts, where people always say, well, is it statistically significant? Does something fall within this range? But I think often people miss that outcomes are not equally distributed across that range. It is like a normal distribution around the point estimate, and what that means is like that is significantly more accurate than the upper and the lower bound, and I think this helps people make better decisions when you kind of like tighten the view of what you're looking at and try to optimize.
It's all, and we actually do now have, or we kind of have experimented with the media mix model as well, and it's somewhere that the media mix model often falls short, is that very few of our channels and certainly campaigns hit significance or have much confidence from our MMM findings, rendering it also like just not that useful.
Yeah, well, one of the, I think really the most exciting and interesting tests I saw from you guys was this one. Tell us a little bit more about it.
This is a terrifying one, but we are pretty large for a baby company with a pretty specific product set, and we have relatively high market share. And so one of the questions was, basically a couple days a month we go on sale, 20% off, we run a promotion, it clears out the funnel. But the question was, historically we had spent up on ads during that period to make sure that we captured all the rest of the funnel and that everyone knew that we were running the sale, et cetera. And I don't even remember where the idea for this one came, but the question was, if it's really all coming from email and SMS, so people want our products, they signed up, they're thinking about it, they're delaying, and then a sale comes along, they're probably going to get our email or SMS and know about the sale and check out. So we were like, well, what happens if we cut spend in half during a sale? Maybe we don't have to go reacquire effectively what is a first-time user if they're already in our CRM. So we ran the test of cutting spend pretty significantly, like much more significantly than 1%. And it turned out that a lot of that spend was not incremental.
Yeah, I think a 50% drop in ad spend leading to a 1% drop in sales is a pretty startling outcome, and I think highlights all of the ways, like, especially I think MMMs will run into these challenges, but when you have these multi-collinearity issues of events generally being correlated, in a world where you guys are having a promotion, it will actually suggest, like an MMM or like linear-based models would suggest that you actually are doing better and you're driving a larger impact.
But and they did. Like our ROIs in every other platform doubled during promotions.
Yeah, and so it's really impossible to demarcate what is actually driving the business versus what are the external factors that are impacting you. And I think like something, when I was at Google, I advocated for this a lot, although I didn't have as much success there as I feel like we're seeing with our customers at Haus, is advocating for flighted strategies. Like, we are going to have a playbook for when we're doing promotions. We're going to have a playbook for certain big brands, like during New Fronts Week, or like these big tentpole events or like the Super Bowl. These like big tentpole events on their calendar. I think often folks they try to run the same playbook across the year, and then they're wondering, oh, I feel like I'm missing something here. There's an opportunity to be gained. And I think saying like, what is the exact tool you're going to be using at the right moment to drive your business?
Yeah, and I mean, this one, I think there are very few companies, certainly larger companies, that don't have very nice bosses that let them run crazy tests like this, especially during promos that are designed to drive a significant chunk of business. But fortunately, I have the latitude to take big swings.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point of like, often folks will think about the cost of testing, and they won't think about the opportunity cost of not testing.
Right.
Because not doing that is just, over the course of the business could be tons and tons of money continually being invested. Not only that, it's not like the data will emerge out of the blue that tells you the opposite story. You really need to generate the intervention and run an experiment.
Yeah.
So following up with a couple last steps, like testing your biggest bets, like how you can sell more on different channels, always test during those periods. I'm curious, like, is there any last advice you'd give to the group of how you've thought about incrementality and moving into the world of experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is you have to be running incrementality if you want 100% actionable, reliable information. Don't just rely on GA. Don't just rely on an MTA or a media mix model for that matter. You really need to be doing incrementality testing.
Well, thank you for joining. Again, we're available. We at Haus have a booth here. Thank you to Aaron for joining me today, and would love to talk with anybody about experimentation and how incrementality testing can supercharge the business.
Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. I always answer too. Love talking shop.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.